Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. How important are breakthroughs in science? The following case could not have been solved without the most advanced crime tool of the 20th century. Exhibit A, DNA. Leslie Wilco was a top student who chose not to go to college so she could pursue a career as an actress. She saw becoming a pro football cheerleader as a stepping stone to getting a theatrical agent. On that Thursday night in 1982, she'd been at cheerleading practice. Afterwards, the whole cheerleading squad went to a nearby pub. Around midnight, Leslie caught a lift to the subway with one of the other cheerleaders. They'd gotten lost, which is why she ended up on the last subway and the last bus. For safety reasons, Leslie sat at the front and talked to the driver. The driver was very friendly. It was his last run before heading back to the garage. He asked her if she'd like to stay on, and he'd drop her off on the way back. They'd have more time to talk. But she was anxious to get home. Leslie Wilco only lived 5 houses away. She only got as far as the first house. A neighbor found her at 6 in the morning and called police. Her body was found in what is called the surrender position. Today, identification officers collect evidence and photograph the crime scene. Back in 1982, detectives did it themselves. Their work would prove invaluable.
I recall looking at the scene, being concerned that it had been exposed to the elements for a period of time. From an investigative perspective, we had a weak crime scene. There wasn't a lot of physical evidence tying the killer to the crime scene. There weren't fingerprints left at the scene that we were able to use to identify the killer.
The body itself is like a second crime scene, so detectives hope the autopsy will give them added clues to the murder.
There were various abrasions or scratches on the surface of the neck, as well as some contusions or bruises. In addition, there were the internal injuries that were documented, including multiple bruising scattered across both sides of the neck. These are very typical for manual strangulation.
Semen stains in and on her body confirm she's also been sexually assaulted. A forensic biologist will find matching stains on her jumpsuit. The scrapes on her back and arms suggest she was assaulted against a rough surface. Consulting with detectives, the pathologist suggests the rough surface is the adjacent gravel driveway. Based on this, investigators surmise that Leslie Wilco's assailant grabbed her from behind, threw her down onto the driveway, then sexually assaulted and strangled her. Then the killer carried the dead girl over to the front yard where he arranged her in the surrender position and neatly lined up her shoes. Investigators also find it curious that among the victim's scattered clothes, they find no underwear. Interviewing some of the cheerleaders, They find out that Leslie hated wearing underwear with her jumpsuit because it made her panty line show. Instead, she wore pantyhose. But no pantyhose are found at the scene.
Sometimes sex offenders will take either souvenirs or trophies from crime scenes, more often souvenirs. Souvenirs are items which have no intrinsic value, usually, but will be reminiscent of the actual crime for the perpetrator. They will serve as a masturbatory reminder of the event that took place, because it would be exciting for them.
Investigators were anxious to interview the bus driver, probably the last person to see Leslie Wilco alive. The driver tells investigators they'd been chatting, very friendly-like, which is why he was surprised when she jumped up and pulled the cord, rather than just telling him that her stop was coming up. And he was more surprised when the back door opened. He'd forgotten that there was anyone else on the bus. He yelled goodnight and got no answer. He never got a good look at the guy. So to aid his memory, police called in a hypnotist.
Hypnosis can be very useful in a forensic context to assist witnesses or victims in recollecting memory they may not originally have provided in the investigation. So it sometimes helps to loosen some of the barriers to recollection, to help an individual reinstate internally, through a mental process, the original context in which they were located or found themselves at the time that the occurrence took place.
The hypnotist tells the driver to close his eyes and raise one hand. Then, guiding him with suggestions, he eases him back into the scene. From the driver's answers, it's apparent that he was infatuated with Leslie, which helps explain why he forgot about the other passenger. He remembers thinking, he looks like a 40-year-old businessman coming home from a tiring day at the office. The driver feels awful about not waiting and watching Leslie till she'd made it home safely.
Was he a suspect? Yes, in my mind he was, because he was one of the last people to see the victim.
Another leading suspect is Jim Hutchin, Leslie's ex-high school sweetheart. Though Hutchin has no criminal record, what gives police pause is a film he made for an English mass media course in his senior high school year. It is about a girl who is pursued by a knife-wielding maniac and is raped and murdered. The girl he got to play the victim was Leslie Wilco. Hutchin tells investigators one of the reasons he picked Leslie was because her fragile looks would add to the movie's suspense.
It was a chilling experience, seeing this film of a similar type situation. That's one thing that we focused on and had to look at and had to either confirm or eliminate him as a suspect.
A fellow police officer brings another suspect to Detective Harris's attention. A week after Leslie Wilco's murder, he attacked and raped a woman in the elevator of an apartment house not far away. His name is William Henson. Though the method of sexual assault seems similar, Henson didn't kill the woman.
And he's one of the calmest individuals that I've ever interviewed. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't upset. He genuinely appeared to be enjoying the interest or the attention that he was receiving.
It was now up to forensic science to narrow the field. Exhibit A held the answer. These then were the four leading suspects: the bus driver, the ex-boyfriend, the sexual offender, and the mysterious 40-year-old passenger whom police, even weeks after the murder, had yet to identify. The victim's clothes from the murder scene are sent to be examined at the Center of Forensic Sciences. In 1982, ABO was the most commonly used blood typing system.
The ABO classification system breaks the entire population down into 4 major types: Group O, Group A, Group AB, and Group B. 80% of the population secrete their ABO blood group types into their other body fluids. So if you are a secretor, an A secretor, that means that that group A substance will be found in all of your body secretions, your saliva, semen, perspiration, etc. From the typing of the semen stains that were evaluated in the early 80s, we knew that the semen in the case came from a type A secretor.
The ABO system was helpful in narrowing down the field of suspects and particularly useful in eliminating suspects.
The bus driver, it turns out, was not an A secretor, so he's immediately ruled out as a suspect. The ex-boyfriend is. Though he has no criminal record or history of sexual assault, police interview him about his sexual relationship with the victim. They note he is extremely agitated. Is this guilt or grief?
The third suspect, the sexual assailant, William Henson, is also an A secretor. As for the last suspect, the mysterious 40-year-old bus passenger, police still couldn't locate him. Though an unsolved homicide is never officially dropped, new cases keep coming in. Old cases get put on the back burner. The murder dropped from the front page to somewhere in the middle, then dropped out of the news altogether. Another of those items that every once in a while someone wonders about. Did they ever catch whoever killed that cheerleader?
"13 years pass. Vic Matanovic wants to start a cold case squad to reinvestigate old unsolved murders.
The original investigators had some good leads, but unfortunately they ran out of time. And maybe having a second look through a different set of eyes, there's a good potential of having maybe some of these cases resolved.
His superiors are intrigued by the idea, but not convinced. They agree to let him use Leslie Wilco's rape murder as his test case.
In a new case, you begin to learn information on a day-to-day basis. Now, here you may have anywhere from 15 to 20 investigative boxes full of information. You've got photographs, you've got the pathology report, and you've got the Center of Forensic Sciences report of any exhibits that were tested back in 1982.
By 1995, ABO testing had given way to DNA profiling.
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it's the chemical blueprint of life. It's the map that defines who you are, who I am, and makes us different from everyone else in this world, with the single exception of our identical twin, should we have one.
Given that DNA profiling can be effective even with 13-year-old samples, the semen recovered from the victim's body and jumpsuit suddenly takes on new significance.
Semen's an excellent source. It's the most concentrated source of DNA from any body fluid.
We were not able to get all the results from the semen staining on the jumpsuit. And so I asked myself the question, well, is there any semen externally in the vaginal area? And I looked at the pubic hair sample, which was taken as a comparison sample by during the autopsy by the pathologist. And I thought, well, an outside chance, perhaps there's some semen caught up in those hairs. And indeed there was. And we proceeded to extract the DNA from it, and we'd obtained a DNA profile from it, which became actually the important specimen in the case.
Whereas ABO testing could narrow the field of suspects to a third of all the males in Ontario, DNA profiling could narrow it down to 3 men in the whole province.
All of the work that we do compares the profiles of DNA from an unknown sample to a known sample. We had a very clear profile from the spermatozoa on the matted pubic hair from the victim. We could generate a clear profile from the boyfriend of the victim and a partial profile from the other suspect. The first test gave us very valuable information because it told us that it could not have come from the boyfriend of the victim. He could not have left that semen. And it tells us further that the other suspect had not been eliminated.
Two things really that are important in any type of homicide investigation. Number one is that scene, very, very important. And number two is the deceased. Go back and retrace the movements of that person from the time he or she were last seen alive till the time their body is found.
Studying the crime scene photos and visiting the site, even 13 years later, Matanovic makes some interesting connections. In a detail of a detail on a photograph, Matanovic notices a crushed flower at the base of the tree. Why would it be crushed?
Maybe that's where the assailant assaulted the victim.
Perhaps the assailant trampled the flower when he slammed the victim's body against the tree, and the marks on her back are from the tree's rough bark.
The implication is that Leslie Wilco's killer did not attack her in the open area of the driveway, but rather in the hidden shadows of a tree. Matanovic learns not only were the victim's shoes put neatly beside her, but all her clothes had been neatly folded by her body,
which indicates a sexual predator with even more of a fetish than the missing pantyhose suggest. In 1982,
police had found William Henson with a briefcase full of lingerie.
When he was arrested on other occasions, he had underwear stuffed in his own pants, female underwear. On one occasion, when he was under surveillance back in the mid-1990s, he was actually seen going into a department store and sniffing underwear. So that becomes important because what was the only item of clothing missing from the crime scene? Female underwear.
In addition to Henson's 1982 elevator attack, which got him 18 months in jail,
there was another elevator attack, and he was jailed for 3 years. 48 days after being released, he attacked another woman in a washroom and served another 5 years.
Everything now points to Henson as the prime suspect. The problem is that some of the samples from 1982 can no longer be tested. To run a DNA profile, the lab needs a fresh sample of Henson's saliva.
It could be saliva on a fork. It could be saliva on a cup that a person has been drinking from, or a beer bottle that they've been drinking from. It could be on chewing gum that's been discarded, on a Kleenex in which they blow in their nose and discarded. Any sort of biological sample that you can imagine would be suitable for DNA analysis in our hands.
Detectives are able to recover one of Henson's cigarette butts and have it analyzed.
We were able to say, number one, that we did have a match between the saliva on the cigarette butt from Henson and the semen from the sample from the victim. Precision of the technique is extremely good. In this particular instance, this composite profile had a frequency in Caucasians of approximately 1 in 1,700,000 people.
But what about the matter of the mysterious 40-year-old bus passenger police could never locate?
As Matanovic reviewed the bus driver's transcript yet another time, it dawned on him that the passenger might not have been a tired 40-year-old businessman at all, but a young William Henson trying to seem inconspicuous as he observed his prey. After Leslie got off the bus, Henson slipped out the back door. He started walking ahead of her, but found a way to get behind her. Then he grabbed her, smashed her against the tree, sexually assaulted and strangled her. Almost 15 years to the day after the murder, Henson was convicted of the first-degree murder of Leslie Wilco and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years.
Mr. Henson was tried by a judge and jury. He was convicted based on the evidence. And it's important thing to me is that he's off the streets. And for him being off the streets, there's a lot of people that are safer.
While DNA helped convict William Henson, it also exonerated Jim Hutchin, Leslie's ex-high school sweetheart, who had lived all these years under a cloud of suspicion. If there's hope to be found in this devastating murder, it's the fact that advances in forensic science in the hands of inspired investigators can be used to solve crimes that were once considered unsolvable. The stories in Exhibit A are based on actual cases. The names of the victims have been changed to protect their identities. The names of the guilty are real.